Hi, good morning. We're looking at covering the Learning Outcome 2 in the unit that we've started last week, which is Human Resources Management. And in this particular learning outcome, which is Learning Outcome 2, we're going to be looking at how do we understand the importance of the strategic human resource process. And in general, what we will do is after we discuss the process, we'll discuss the roles of various roles which are involved in the strategic HRM management. And lastly, what we'll look at is some of the strategies, which is particularly implementation of some of these processes and roles that we looked at in task 1 and 2 will be then discussed from a point of view of how they are implemented within the organization. I've got this presentation which is related specifically to the Learning Outcome 2, and along with this I'm going to send you a handout after the session is over, which will give you a bit more reading into the book, and also refer to the handout which will have specific examples showing a bit of theory related around the strategic HRM process and the role of management, and then it will give you an example in terms of elaborating the practice into how the strategies are then implemented within the organization by HR department. So let's crack on with this, and obviously just a few slides that we're going to go through, and I'm going to try and make them as interactive as possible. Now, obviously with regards to this learning outcome, I'm going to try and break this up into, when we say understand the formulation and implementation of human resource strategies, what does this mean? This basically means that we're going to be studying 3 parts in this particular learning outcome. One is we need to understand what is the HRM process. Once we understand the HR process, we then need to look at the roles. What are the different kind of roles which people play within the HR process in particular? And the HR process includes planning, training, development, recruitment, selection, orientation when new employees join and things like that. And then towards the end, what we will look at is we will look at understanding how these processes, which is planning, recruitment, selection, any one of the process we'll pick up, and we'll see how they are then developed and implemented within the organization. So from a point of view of just detailing out the learning outcomes here have been done on the slide 2 and 3. Going forward, so let's look at why is HRM very important? Why do we see the role of HRM within or human resources department within any particular organization is considered important? As you understand that human resources or resources in general, when we look at people as resources in general, are one of the most important resource which kind of work, control, and also direct all the other resources in the organization. So the importance of HRM is there because it becomes a necessary part in terms of one of the key functions within the organization. So you have various departments or functions like sales, marketing, distribution, logistics, production, engineering. Similarly, you have HR as one of the important functions because it helps us in organizing various resources within the organization. Now, the key thing that they are particularly involved with is the fact that they look at selection, training, and recruitment in terms of, and some to a certain extent across the year when we have performance appraisals, that is nothing but evaluation of your performance against the target set. Now, HR is a very strategic tool because it helps to develop, human resource, in particular people as a resource, which give you competitive advantage in today's world. Because most organizations, as you would have heard the term that if you don't have a good team, then sometimes you're not able to achieve the objectives or meet the targets, is because the team is not there, or you do not have sufficient people in terms of talented people with skills not there to be able to achieve those goals. So that is why people as a resource is now considered as a very strategic tool. You look at organizations specifically like LinkedIn, Facebook, Google, they consider people as one of the most important strategic resource within the organization. The other bit which we look at is HR also adds value to the firm in terms of they bring across a lot of practices. These work practices could be developed in tandem with resources within the organization or with other departments, but also at the same time they tend to kind of dissipate the best practices within the organization across various departments. And this then leads to maybe higher productivity, more efficiency, and higher or more loyalty from a point of view of employees within the organization. Now, the HRM process basically consists of a couple of things. As you can see, that the HRM process will basically look at things like they are involved in the selection of employees during the recruitment process. So the HR department looks at, or the HR manager in particular looks at selection of the most competent employees through a process of recruitment and selection for that particular position or a job description. Now, they also look at making sure that there are enough employees available within a particular role and a function to be able to complete and help complete those objectives set by the organization and the management. And also their key role is to make sure that the resource are up to date in terms of knowledge, and they have the required skills to be able to perform their jobs well. The other bit that we look at is in terms of the key role that they do is they are responsible for ensuring that they are able to retain through the process of performance, reward management, incentives, bonus, and these kind of things that we will look at a bit later. So their main role is also to look at retention of high performing or performing employees in the organization, and then move some of those employees with the aspect of training and development into higher positions or higher roles, so that they can develop their capability, and also the organization in general then ends up achieving its objectives in a better fashion. Now, HR as a department also deals with external organizations, and when I say environmental factors, it basically means that HR as a department will be the first line of discussion when we look at employees being a part of the labor union. That means if you look at UK in particular, you see that employees can become and take up membership of unions in the workplace, and the unions basically are there to protect the rights and the worker rights, and obviously look at in general the betterment of the employees. If they feel that they've not had a good hand, or they've been left out by the organization, that their employees normally end up approaching unions to be able to mitigate those process. So HR department plays a very important role in terms of ensuring that there is a proper representation of the staff and workers working within an organization, and their rights are protected. So they in turn deal with the unions, and there is a set specific process they set, so that in the case of any eventuality, then it can be dealt with effectively. Now, they also look at something called a collective bargaining agreement, which is nothing but a contractual agreement between the firm and the union elected to represent, in the case of, say, bargaining unit of employees, in case if the management and the workers are not able to reach a conclusion. Say, for example, when we looked at the recent strike by the train workers, or the train drivers in particular, the union stepped in, and what they said is that we need to have an additional attendant in the train which looks after the closure of doors rather than the driver. So this dispute, which could not be settled between the management and the employees, was then taken up by the union, and as a result they collectively bargained to get an agreement, which I think is currently ongoing. So they unions basically play a key role, but the mediation with the unions and the role which they play in terms of discussion of things with the management or in an organization is generally also done through the HR department. Now, in some cases, what we also look at is HR department is clearly involved in taking affirmative action. That means the organization requires to proactively kind of secure its asset, intellectual property, and that is done through the HR contracts or employment contracts, which HR department in general draws up. So any employee, when it joins the organization, they have to fall in line and obviously follow the law and rules and regulations of the organization. And in some cases, these are then documented in terms of, contracts, which are called job contracts, or, contracts in general, which basically define all the functions, through which or all the routes through which the employee will go through before being inducted into the organization. Now, some of these contracts, they protect the organization in terms of their intellectual property, their their assets, and liability in terms of a court action. But in general, these contracts are drawn up, which basically also protect the employees and also give them the rights and responsibilities to be able to deal with the organization effectively. Then we look at, what are the processes. So, for example, so far in the slides that we have covered, we've understood what is the role of HR. Now let's look at when we have understood the role or the process of HR, what we need to be able to do is understand what roles the HR actually performs in the organization. Now, one of the key roles that we look at is the process of human resources planning, or HRP as we call it, HR planning in short. This process is a process by which managers ensure that they have the right number and kind of people in the right places in the right times who are capable of effectively and efficiently performing their task. Now let's look at an example of, say, a production floor wherein you imagine working within a car factory and you do an 8-hour shift. Now the supervisor or the manager within that production shift needs to ensure that he has relevant number of employees to be able to assemble the cars. So there are employees which will be assembling tires or, kind of working on the dashboard of the car, working on the paint, working on the assembly of the engine and things like that. Now, if you're falling short of employees, then at some stage, the whole process then keeps shifting. And because of this particular process, what tends to happen is the productivity of the, plant actually decreases. So it is the responsibility of the HR manager to be able to do effective planning, and that effective planning can only be done if they clearly know the number of employees which are required to be able to do that particular role in that particular shift. So one of the key functions, when we look at roles performed by HR in particular, is the planning role, and this role is key to the annual planning requirements of resources against the targets set by the objectives set by the management. So when you look at a company having an annual plan, HR also creates an annual plan which basically is based around the steps has steps which include planning, recruitment, training and development of human resources, so that they are able to better cope with the responsibility given and then work in that particular aspect to help achieve the organizational goal. Now, there are various steps in HR planning. We look at steps like assessing current requirements. So the current set of employees who've been working within the organization will be assessed against the skill set which is required for them to be able to take up jobs. If they feel that they do not have the current skills, or the skills required to be able to do the job, then the HR process is to put them into training and development. The other bit would be to look at assessing future needs. So if imagine an organization which is looking at introducing a new product. Now, if you're introducing a new product, then at some stage, what the HR department will do is sit with the current, people within the sales, marketing, or production engineering department, and they will look at assessing the future requirements of what would be required, when this product is launched. So it could be additional employees required. It could be people with existing workforce within the department would require to be, say, reskilled. So imagine a car factory which is producing cars based on diesel and petrol engines, but at some stage they start to look at producing cars which will be eco-friendly and battery operated. That means they will have different set of components. So in this case, the HR department will look at future requirements, sitting with the production floor in the engineering department to understand at what stage the new recruitment or the training and development needs to be put in place for these existing employees to start to cope with the requirements of the new job spec. And they also look at developing a program so that they are continuously in the process of meeting the needs of the organization. It could be reward, it could be performance management, it could be appraisals, it could also be recruitment, training and development. They are all a part of the HR annual calendar. Now, the critical bit which they look at in particular in the whole process is that they look at the whole idea of inventory. So in general, when you are working within an organization where there is lots of stocks involved, what you tend to do is you look at inventory. So within the case of HR, human resource particularly looks at the inventory from a point of view of number of people employed within the organization. They look at job description, they look at job analysis, and they look at the knowledge and skill set and abilities which the employees have to be able to perform a particular job, to the right fashion or, to the utmost efficiency. Now, this requires doing regular interviews, engaging in terms of direct observations, collecting reports, which could be appraisal reports, it could be reports from the managers, and this is one of the clear set of functions which the HR department does under the HR planning process. They also look at job descriptions and specification. That means sometimes if you've been working in a particular role and due to the change in the requirement of the nature of your job description might need to be altered, and this is reviewed on an annual basis. And then in some cases, if your job description changes, then the outputs required in terms of the various bits required for you to be able to perform well is then looked at through the specification route. And in some cases, when job interviews or job adverts are done in the market, and when we end up applying, what they say is we need a minimum of 2-1 bachelor's degree or a 2-1 degree in computer engineering, because they are going to be recruiting specific people to be able to work in that department. So this is a continuous process, and the HR planning which is required, it basically keeps up with this continuous requirement of how the organization's aimed and objectives are shaping up. Sometimes you also look at the number of employees versus the demand of employees. That means in certain departments there will be more requirement because of, say, a festive season coming. So if you look at John Lewis, for example, they might need more people on foot in the stores during the Christmas period, so they end up doing temporary employment. And these temporary staff which are employed during the peak period of the festive season are basically temporary workers. They are predominantly employed to meet the increased demand of customers in the stores. And in this case, this is one of the strategic goals wherein the HR department is able to forecast which store requires how many employees, and when they need to be recruited and how soon will they need to be recruited to be able to help out in the festive period. The other process that we've discussed briefly earlier is the process of recruitment and de-recruitment. So recruitment is nothing but the identification of attracting more capable applicants or employees to your organization. De-recruitment sometimes means that if the organization has surplus employees, you see redundancies as a process, and that is a process during which, if there is a fall in demand and there is not enough supply, and there is enough supply in terms of material available, then the organizations on the manufacturing side look at kind of redundancies or layover staff, and that process is nothing but looking at de-recruitment. Now, e-recruitment is recruiting employees through the internet. Over the years, what has happened is that a lot of organizations now have started to recruit. There were various recruitment methods. So recruitment methods could be, you have employee referrals, which sometimes HR department work with. They also look at employment agencies, but because of organizations like LinkedIn and Monster and other jobs portal coming in, there's an increasing trend of the HR department looking at the planning process. And when they look at this in terms of recruitment, they are now starting to look at utilizing the internet or e-recruitment as a process to be able to look at bringing employees into the organization. Another process which is closely related to recruitment is selection. Selection is the process of screening job applicants to ensure the most appropriate applicants are hired for that job. And the selection process in various organizations differs according to various reasons. So there could be various processes through which you are asked to do some tests in terms of group interviews, group discussions, and then finally leading to an interview wherein you are able to then be shortlisted and you join the organization. So selection also involves validity and reliability. Sometimes they ask for references, they ask for written application. You're asked to fill up the application forms. You're asked to do written tests. Sometimes simulations are done. If you're applying for engineering jobs in particular, they will ask you to go through some simulative tests. After which you have interviews, background investigation or checks are done. And in some cases, when you look at armed forces or jobs which require physical labor, in some cases fitness, would be asked to undergo physical examination. Now, individual slides, I'm not going to go through, but I'll leave it to you to go through, which have been elaborated slightly on that. Now, the other bit that we will look at is the important function of, employee performance management. This is a process through which the HR establishes performance standards and does performance appraisals for employees across the year to help ensure that they are meeting the set requirements. In some cases, these are the various appraisal methods that we look at, which could be written essays, critical incidents are recorded, there are graphical rating scales, you have multiple comparisons, management by objective, which is one of the key terms which we use nowadays, and obviously 360-degree feedback. So, and then we also look at compensation and benefit. Depending on how your appraisals happen, the compensation and benefits for these organizations are then also looked at, wherein the base salary, the bonus, the incentive schemes are set for the employees. Now, So here is what we will end today's session, and which covers the learning outcome 2. I'm going to send this presentation on to you along with a handout, which will help you understand and give you some more details in terms of the HR process, the rules, and also how the implementation and review is done, with regards to this particular learning outcome. So thanks a lot for joining this session, and I will then hopefully speak to you a bit later. Thank you. Bye now.